Possible. Hello, Vikings. I'm here with Dr. Mike Munoz, our Vice President of Student Services at Long Beach City College, and today we are discussing mental health in men. My first question for you, Doctor, is what does mental health mean for you personally?
So I think what mental health in men means for me personally is it's an awakening. I think we are entering a time and space where it's a deep awakening around the importance of self-care, around the importance of challenging a lot of our norms around masculinity and what it means to be a man. We know through, if you think of the traditional norms, men tend to believe in this notion of like self-reliance where we don't seek help, we don't admit when we're feeling a certain way. We kind of suppress those feelings, and I think, in society today, we're really starting to challenge those norms.
Can you describe the awakening process? Is there a way to describe that?
So I'm gonna use myself as an example.
Okay.
I grew up in a pretty traditional Latino household. My father, I would say, would meet the stereotypical definition of a machismo, someone that kind of taught me, if I cried, I got spanked harder. As a kid, that kind of home environment. I was taught from a very early age to suppress my feelings. And so as I aged, and really, to be honest with you, as I became a parent myself, I was forced to do some self-reflection.
Wow.
And think about the type of father I wanted to be to the daughter that I had. And so I think for me, my awakening started at home first, in myself and wanting to be a better parent. But what it looks like for me is really kind of starting to challenge some of those gender norms. Those norms around masculinity, such like I mentioned, the importance of the over-reliance of self-reliance, the kind of machismo attitude of, power difference between men and women, where women are in these roles that they're here to serve us in our households, right?
How do you think that society has prioritized or set the stage, so to speak, for mental health for men? We can talk about traditionally first.
Sure. So I think traditionally, when we think of I'm kind of like what I talked about with the whole concept of machismo, right? Traditionally, when we think of masculinity, we think of certain traits. And what we realize through research is when men really hold firm to those traditional norms, like the ones I mentioned, like being the playboy or seeing women in a lesser role, or having a need for emotional control or not seeking help when they need it. We know that those traits, those behaviors, are tied to high levels of depression and other mental health disorders. So there's actually a negative side effect or negative consequence when we are very rigid with those kind of traditional masculine norms. So that sets the stage for what we're talking about, and why I said we need an awakening, right?
Would you say that traditionally men have just operated with this like depression and even like this ideology of the way they're supposed to act, like just it's like normally, I don't know, like
it's been normalized. Yeah, so it's normalized. So in our culture, it's U.S. society, we're kind of taught like if you ask for help, it's a sign of weakness. And men don't want to be perceived as weak, so they try to self-manage whatever they're going through. And we don't see this just in mental health. We see this in other health outcomes, like with diabetes and other things. It's like we just try to manage whatever it is we have at home, because if we're seeking help, it shows a sign of weakness. And I'm generalizing. I'm not saying all men view things this way, but those that have a very rigid, traditional view of masculinity, oftentimes they're less likely to come forward and seek help when they need it, whether it's mental health or other health-related outcomes.
Got it. So traditionally, we've come from a place where men have operated with like this attitude and like this undertone of like I'm tough, I'm strong, I'm dominant, without realizing that it is affecting their mental health.
We need to help young men in our country and in our campuses reframe, right, what masculinity looks like. If we allow the status quo to continue, we're going to continue to have the same results. We're going to have high suicide rates amongst men under 45. We're going to continue to have men suffer through depression. And there's secondary effects of that. It's not just the negative effects associated with depression and other mental health issues that's experienced by the man, but also their partners, their family members. That it has an effect on the whole system. If they have children,
What do you think we can do to alleviate this stigma for young men at home, just starting in the home?
I think first and foremost, we have to be okay with teaching young men to talk about their feelings, to express what they're feeling, to be able to say, you are, just because we are aware of what we're feeling and we talk about our feelings, that doesn't equate to being weak. And so that refrain and creating homes and loving homes where people can express what they're feeling without being seen as being weak is a good place to start. Another thing I think is important too is, to not over-glorify these traditional gender norms. So I think it's important for young children in the home to not see the mother in only a servant role. If that's kind of the norm in the house, then that starts to feed into this idea of being machismo, and this is what I strive for in my home when I reproduce my own home, right? And so I think it's really important to kind of challenge some of those gender norms within the house. I think it's also important to treat your children equally.
What advice would you give a young man or woman in a household with maybe a stricter setting in the home with parents who really hold on to these ideologies of gender norms,
That's a really good question, because, we don't always have full control of our family, right? Our family dynamics. In some families, it's harder to initiate dialogue in other family systems, but I think first, if I was in that situation, I would try to open up lines of communication, whether it's with my mom or my dad or both, or wherever I feel like I might be able to reach more. I would start to open up dialogue around conversations around masculinity, around these gender norms, and talk about how it affects you personally. Also, allies matter. If you have siblings, and so maybe you're able to have a sibling go with you, so it's not just one child, going to the parent, but maybe you're having a conversation at the sibling level and saying, we need to really kind of challenge some of the norms in our family.
Yeah.
So let's bring them forward as, in an alliance, right? So maybe it's 2 or 3 siblings going and talking to mom and dad.
Wow,
right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, and I'm kind of this is reverse. I did this as a parent a lot.
Okay.
In my parent role with my daughter,
Okay.
is I would purposely, when there was a social issue that was a little taboo or uncomfortable for me to talk about, I would find a movie as a conversation point.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we can use, other forms of media like TV shows or movies or an article in a newspaper as a starting point for conversation.
I love that, because you're incorporating academia with that, and you're both learning, together. So it's a really good one. That's good advice. All right, Dr. Munoz, last question. So for you personally, what do you do to help clear your mind and maintain your mental health?
I have found mindfulness and using techniques of mindfulness really productive in clearing my mind. I am one of those people that has a racing mind. My mind is always going, and it's hard for me to quiet my mind. And so I engage in practices of conscious breathing, meditation. I actually have time carved out every day, little alerts on my phone that nudge me that it's time to breathe. It's time to engage in some mindfulness practices. And then when that doesn't work, because sometimes that doesn't always work because I'm under a real high stress point in my life, I usually then try to pause and do some self-reflection. I like to be outdoors, so I'll even try to find spaces where I can be outside, and even if it's taking my shoes off and walking barefoot in the grass for a few minutes just to kind of recenter myself. I've been known to do that from time to time, but it could just be even something where you just step away from your daily routine and do something that makes you happy.
Yes.
And that's awesome.
Go you. Very proud of you.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Okay, well, I think this concludes our interview, and thank you so much for your time. All of your advice, everything is this is a major resourceful interview, I feel like. And I hope everyone can just take something special from it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your
Appreciate
time.
you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Awesome.
Go Vikings.
Go Vikings.